Yeah. That is my new funeral song. I want that played at my funeral, and Matt has to play the drums on it. Yeah, don't you think? Woo! And now we take a deep breath. Woo. It's like a psychic bath. Woo. Everything's woken up, alive, conscious, awake, alert, and aware. Yes? Yes? Yes. And that's a good thing, because we are talking about an intriguing subject, mind over matter. Now, when I first got into metaphysics, I don't know about you, if you ever remember ever hearing about a guy named Uri Geller. Remember that? He used to stick pins in his arms and not bleed, and I was like, okay, it's a little bit of a parlor trick. I don't really know what's going on. It's a little scary, a little spooky. And sometimes that's how we hold this conversation, mind over matter. Or we think that it is devoted, it is, what's the word I want? It's simply only the purview of religion. Well, prayer, right? Faith. With faith, you can move mountains. But it's not really so. So I'm going to begin by telling you a story. This is the story of my son, and he's 23 years old now, and he and I almost died in childbirth. Very long, painful childbirth, and thank God for Western medicine. If it hadn't been for Western medicine and that they knew what to do and what little extra things to give me, Jason would not have been able to be born, and we would have both died. He spent the first 5 days in the hospital. We were ambulanced over the mountains to Children's Hospital in Seattle, and I sat in a rocking chair by his crib, wondering whether he was going to make it. Thank God for Children's Hospital, that they knew what to do. They knew how to get the IV into his little teeny, tiny infant veins. They knew how to stabilize his blood sugar so that at 5 days old, I could finally take him home. 4 or 5 months later, I noticed that he was going cross-eyed. And I took him to the doctor. And the doctor said, yeah, all infants, they look kind of funny. They don't worry about it. Well, I went back and I said, no, there's something not right. He looks cross-eyed to me. And she examined, and she was great. And she got me through the pregnancy and the birth. And she said, no, I don't see anything. I don't think so. 2 weeks later, I was in her office again. No, really, something's not right with Jason's eyes. And she said, I'm going to trust your mother's intuition. I don't see it, but you see him every day, and I only see him for these short periods of time. So she sent me back over the mountains to Children's Hospital, to a specialist, an eye specialist. And sure enough, a very, very, very unusual at 6 months, Jason was developing a lazy eye. Mostly they don't develop until a year or 2, even 3 years old. A lazy eye doesn't develop. And he was developing it so unbelievably early. And so what the doctor told me was that we had to patch his eye alternately every day. We had to patch one eye and then the other eye the next day. Because with an lazy eye that young, if he doesn't learn to use that eye that's going lazy, by the time he's a year old, he would be blind in that eye, because the brain wouldn't learn to make the connection with the eye. Not that there's anything wrong with the eye, but the brain wouldn't learn how to see out of it. So we patched him, and at 6 months old, he got glasses. Now, if you can imagine trying to keep glasses on a 6-month-old, I am a loving and patient mother, and I would occasionally say to him, if you don't leave your glasses on, I will staple them to the side of your head. Thank God he knew I didn't mean it. Jason had an eye surgery when he was 7 months old. He had a second eye surgery when he was 18 months old. He had a third eye surgery at 2 1/4. He had his fourth and final eye surgery when he was almost 4 years old. And during that time, we went to specialist after specialist, doctor after doctor. You know, they had to move the muscles on these little tiny infant eyes, and they could not make any promises. And they told me the prognosis. And what I told Jason is, it's okay. You'll grow into yourself. You'll be all right. Joe Dispenza, in our book that we're reading, Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself, he says the brain and body interact via powerful electrochemical signals. Thought creates a chemical in the brain, which from the brain is sent out into the body so that the body will feel correspondingly. And then the body sends a confirming message back that it's now feeling what the body is, that it's now feeling what the brain is thinking. Did you get that? So a chemical is produced by a thought. A chemical is produced in the brain, which is sent out into the body, and so that the body will have a feeling. And then the body feels that feeling and returns immediately a message to the brain saying, got it, we're on the board, we're feeling what you are thinking. This is done through neurotransmitters, neuropeptides, and hormones, which Joe calls the cause and effect chemicals of the brain. Over time, these thinking, feeling, thinking loops that we create, right? Thought, which creates a chemical, which creates a feeling in the body, and then that feeling sends back and returns to the brain as thinking. This thinking, feeling, thinking loop becomes memorized. We memorize this loop over time. When this thought happens, this chemical is released, therefore my body feels something. My heart starts to pound, my palms get sweaty, whatever. My body sends that signal back to the brain saying, I'm doing it, on it, feeling all the feelings that go along with that thought. Here's the thought back. This loop becomes memorized. This is what we call a habit, an automatic habit, a pattern of thinking that then becomes lodged in our subjective mind. And it is this subjective pattern of thinking, feeling, thinking, this electrochemical loop that creates the state of our being, the way in which we wander around in the world. By 30, 95% of these are laid down and are running. 95% of our lives are run by these loops that have been laid down in our bodies and are now housed in our subjective mind. In Proverbs, they say it this way, for as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. Do you see, it's the mind-body connection, the brain and heart, the thinking and heart and body connection, the wholeness, that as we think in that loop, so are we. This is ancient wisdom that is now being corroborated with neuroscience. So Jason was a failure to thrive baby. When he was 6 months old, he fell off the charts. He was small to begin with because he had had so much trouble being born. And from 6 months old to 18 months old, he did not grow a centimeter or gain an ounce. That's called a failure to thrive baby. He was nursing full time, and my doctor said, you have to start feeding him food. Jason was allergic to every food he ever put in his mouth. I went to doctors and nutritionists and was given all kinds of regimes, and believe you me, I followed every one of them, and I was given prognosis. And what I told Jason was, don't worry, it's all right. You'll grow into yourself. Something's a little slow to develop. It'll be okay. You see, Jason had also been an incredibly colicky baby. From 3 months to 5.5 months, every day, from 5 until 11, he screamed. And he and I would walk, and we'd rock, and we'd walk. And he would cry, and I would cry. And I would say to him, don't worry, It's okay. Something isn't quite caught up yet. You'll grow into yourself. Anaxagoras, who's a pre-Socratic Greek philosopher, he says this. He was the one who was credited with teaching Socrates. He said, "The mind is the force that animates all matter, has power over all things that have life, is infinite and self-ruled." Now, these philosophers, these mystics, they intuited this information. And we're discovering how true it is. At 2 years and 3 months, my son was continuing to fail in his growth, assessments. He was growing finally. He was very small. He was growing finally, but he wasn't talking. He would talk in individual words. And so every time we would go back, and of course we were on the often track of going back to the doctor, and he was diagnosed failure to speak and given a prognosis. And I said, "Don't worry, honey. You'll grow into yourself. It'll be okay." And I'll never forget the day at 2 years, 4 months, and some odd days, I marked it on my calendar, my son looked at me and he said, "I want to go in the car to the store with you, Mommy." From one word to full sentences with prepositions. He actually never stopped talking after that. He read Harry Potter book 5 in grade 3. It's 1,000 pages in one day. In 5th grade, he was reading at the college level. And all I had said to him was, "Don't worry. You'll grow into yourself." Plato understood that the mind, what he also called the soul, is a link between the material world, the world of matter, including the human body, and the internal, unchanging, value-based world of ideas. The mind, the soul, is the link between these two things. At 2.5, Jason started limping. He'd never caught a ball. Actually, Jason didn't catch a ball until he was 5 years old. Now, he had a lot of little kid friends that were playing football at 2. He didn't catch a ball until he was 5. At 2.5, when he started limping, and we went back to the doctor, they told me that there was something seriously wrong with his gross motor skills, that they weren't developing properly. And I was given a regime of things to do, one of which was to buy one of those old upright metal tricycles, not the big wheel, but the upright one, and I was required to take him around every day on the tricycle so that would strengthen his gross motor skills. And I got a prognosis from the doctor. And what I said to Jason was, "Don't worry. You'll grow into yourself. It'll be okay. You'll learn how to catch a ball. You'll learn how to ride a bike. It'll be okay. You'll grow into yourself." Can hardly tell this story. So Jesus reminds us, "It is done unto us as we have believed. Your faith has made you whole." The mystics are way ahead of us. The spiritual teachers, they know this. Ernest Holmes says this, "There is only one thing that I ask of you, and that is that you will believe absolutely that this thing works. If you do not believe it works, well, it will not work according to what you have believed.
Everything is mind, and all operation is thought. And there is not a law in the universe that is not the power of mind in action. And there never was, and there never will be. Anything you ever saw or ever will see is simply the result of mind in action. Now, Jason went to school. He was a head shorter than all of the kids in kindergarten and first grade. And he went to school with glasses. This did not endear him to me, to his mom, who made him wear the glasses, and to the other kids in school. Now, we would go regularly to this wonderful eye doctor here that I had found. And she said one day, Jason was running down the hallway, and we were talking about, getting him to keep his glasses on. And she said, Petra, he's not wearing the glasses because there's anything wrong with his vision. His vision is perfect. He's got great far sight. His vision is perfect. He needs the glasses to keep his eyes in alignment. That the glasses are designed to cause you to look out of a certain area, and they literally pull the eyes into that. And that's why he has to wear the glasses, because Jason would say, well, I can see without the glasses. And so she was trying to help me understand why he was required to wear these glasses, so that I could help him understand why it was important. And in an offhand, toss-away comment, she said, maybe 25% of the kids, their eyes get strong enough at the teenage years, and they're strong enough to hold their eyes in place, but it's such a small, percentage. It's just a throwaway comment. I went home, and I told Jason, a lot of kids, their eyes get strong enough when they're teenagers, and they don't need their glasses anymore. So if you're struggling with your glasses, don't worry, you're going to grow into yourself. Your eyes are going to get strong, and when you're a teenager, you're not going to need your glasses anymore. And I left it at that. Every once in a while, Jason, when he was frustrated with his glasses, or he couldn't find them, or once again we were looking for them, or he'd sat on them and we'd have to get new ones, and he would say, that's okay, I'm going to become a teenager and I'm not going to need my glasses anymore. When Jason was 12 years old, he decided that he qualified as a teenager, and he threw away his glasses. And he didn't need them anymore. You could only see that his eyes would drift when he was really, really, really tired. It was also a great check when I knew he'd been out partying. I didn't tell him that, though. Who switches on and off the thoughts in the brain? Who can overcome these old patterns and habits of our bodies and minds? We do. We do. Our mind, our essential self that is not confined to the habitual ways of thinking, this loop, this thinking, feeling, thinking loop. That part of us which is not habituated to that. Joe Dispenza in our book says the greatest habit we must break is the habit of being ourselves. That ourselves that is run by the 95% of things that are running in the background, that have become lodged in our subconscious mind through the neurotransmitters, neuropeptides, and hormonal processes that have over and over and over been triggered and reinforced and have become pure habit. And so that is the habit we're breaking. We're breaking the habit of being that so that we can be our true selves, so that we can be the essential reality of who we have come here to be, a radiant, joyous, magnificent being of love and light. In grade school, Jason was bullied. He was shot at by BB guns on his way home. Things were written on our garage door. Because he grew up in an alternative family, he grew up in an alternative religion, he was smaller than every child in his grade. It took him a long time to catch up. By middle school, he was spending a lot of time in detention, and by high school, he was in the slow classes because he couldn't sit still or work like the other kids. He almost flunked out of 6th through 9th grade, each grade. He went through the emo phase, the goth phase. He went through his drinking and alcohol and drug and smoking pot phase. And I said to him, don't worry. You'll grow into yourself. You're becoming a young man of character. He told me that during that time, coming to the center was his lifeline. That coming here was the only place that he felt like he could be himself. And that in the teen group, he found the support and the solace that he needed. Finally, I had asked him on and off throughout this period of time, this is the system you're in, and you have to play by these rules. If it's not working for you, we can take you out. We'll homeschool you. We'll figure something else out. We'll make it work. And he said, no, Mom, this is where my friends are. Well, in Capel, there's a stigma not being in the public schools. The assumption is that there's something wrong with you. You can't quite cut it. You're sent either to one of those schools or a military school or something that's not quite right. And so he was unwilling to carry that stigma. And I watched him slowly but surely begin to sink into failure. And I kept saying, don't worry, you'll figure it out. You'll grow into yourself. Finally, in 2 months into 10th grade, he said, Mom, I just can't do it anymore. I just can't stand it anymore. I said, great. We took him out of school, and within a week he was enrolled in homeschool, online schooling. He went through 10th, 11th, and 12th grade in the next 9 months. He graduated. He went on to get his first job as the popcorn guy at AMC, did the typical route through Starbucks, and ultimately he became a firefighter. He aced his EMT training. He went through Firefighter Academy while working full-time, and finally aced his paramedic training. And paramedic training is like medical school. It's like the first 2 years of medical school, they cram it in there. And he aced paramedic training. He made himself a job by volunteering. While he was working at Starbucks full-time, he would drive once every 3 days, an hour, to volunteer at a fire department, so that when he finished his EMT school and his academic training and his fire academy, that they would hire him on. And they did, and minimum wage, but he had his first firefighter job, and he became Rookie of the Year. And since that point, then, just recently, this last summer, he began putting out for a full-time job in a real department with benefits and all of that, which he's procured last year, and he's grown into himself. Yeah. Joe Dispenza says this: as long as we use familiar feelings as a barometer, as feedback on our efforts to change, we'll always talk ourselves out of greatness. So every time we feel unworthy, or we feel like we can't do it, or we feel those familiar feelings of, oh, here we go again, oh, or now I'm scared, or I don't know how to do this. Do you see, we're using our familiar feeling as a barometer, and that it goes back up to our brain, and it talks us out of it. So we've seen that this conversation about mind over matter has started. It's an ancient conversation. It started with the ancient mystics and our ancient philosophers, and it has grown through the whole philosophical school up to today. In the 19th century, Hegel talked about the mind or spirit as needing an external world in which it's striving to know and use might develop its own capacities. In other words, sharpen and develop its knowledge and reason. So this external world is the place where mind or spirit is developed, is growing its own capacities. But, says Hegel, the external world only serves this purpose because it sets before the mind as an object for its study and appropriation a nature which is in truth the mind's own. Okay, let me say that again. The external world only serves this purpose because it sets before the mind, puts out here, before the mind, as an object of study, a nature which is in truth the mind's own. And having opened up the question of reality actually being what we are, what we ourselves perceive it to be, Hegel went on to define reality itself in terms of mind over matter, soul over body. 19th century philosopher. So in my first community, I had my first practitioner class. I had a lovely couple. Joe and Billy were older people. They'd been in Science of Mind for quite a while, and they had decided to take the classes, and they wanted to become practitioners. And one evening, actually early in the morning, 2-ish in the morning, I got a call from Billy. Her husband was in the hospital. He had had a massive heart attack, and they were not expecting him to live the night. Could I please come? Certainly. I got up immediately and went to the hospital. I went in through the hallways, and the nurse, she said, I'm so happy to see you. I'm so grateful that you're here. It's so important that the grieving widow has somebody to be with her. Joe had not yet passed. And I said, well, I'm grateful to be able to see him and to be with them. And I walked into the room. And there he lay with all the buttons and dials and all the blinking lights and all the tubes down his throat and in his nose and everywhere. But he was conscious. And Billy said, you have to pray. You have to pray. And I looked at Joe, and he nodded his head. And I said, okay, let's pray. What are we praying for? We're going to pray for perfect health. And Billy said, oh, yes, we're praying for wholeness and the truth that God is present right here. And Joe was having trouble nodding his head, and he blinked his eyes and tried to nod the best he could. And so the three of us held hands. And we did what we call spiritual mind treatment, affirmative prayer. I'm certain I prayed for 45 minutes. Joe didn't die that night. And a few days later, Billy asked me to come to the hospital. They were meeting with the doctor. There was some uncertainty and some amazement, and that he hadn't died. And I was there, and the doctor came in and brought the x-rays, and he said, if I hadn't seen you and seen these x-rays, I would have thought this was impossible. And here on this side are the x-rays of your massive heart attack, and see all this scar tissue that you had. You must have had heart attacks you didn't know about, and this is a heart prepared to fail. And here's your x-ray 2 days later. And there's no evidence of a massive heart attack. And the scar tissue's all gone. We don't know how to explain it. But you're free to go. In spiritual mind treatment, Ernest Holmes says, in spiritual mind treatment, a person does not just wish for things. He or she, we consciously use our thought to set creative power in motion and then accept with expectancy the result. We are, in a certain sense, experimenting, not with mind itself, but with our own thought, in seeing what use we can make of the creative power of mind. This creativeness we do not inject into mind. It is already there, a natural law of the universe. We consciously use our thought to set creative power in motion and then accept with expectancy the result. Many of you know that I've just recently bought my own place, a condo, and I spent a year at least looking for it. And I thought, oh, I'm gonna buy a townhome down there. I'm gonna have this cool, hip, urban experience, and I mean, it's really great. And then I would look around and I'd think, like, where are the trees? And there would be some big trees out on the sidewalk, but it was loud and noisy, and oh, they were expensive. I wouldn't live in an apartment that looked like that, let alone pay that kind of money for it. Oh, and so then I ended up looking at little houses with backyards over by White Rock Lake, and then I looked in Carrollton, and I looked here, and I looked there, and then I would go, okay, I'm gonna take a break. Finally, I said to my realtor, I said, you do understand that I am going to buy trees with a condo attached, right? So, when I found this particular condo, I had actually seen it before, and it was kind of, it was not so great because there were tenants in it, and they had moved out, and I went back into it, and it was all empty, and it was, and all the real estate agent did is he opened the windows in the living room, and then he went over and he opened the windows in the bedroom, and he went, feel the breeze. And I looked at the trees, and there at my creek, those of you who've seen my Facebook page, literally outside my little tiny patio, there's a creek. It looks like a small version of the creek that I had in my cabin in the woods that I lived for 3 years. Wild trees, nothing manicured, nothing. It's just wild. 5 minutes away from here in Dallas. Who knew? Who knew it was there? But do you see, during that time, I had moments where I could have easily become disappointed or confused. How many of us say, when it takes a while for something to outpicture, well, maybe I wasn't meant to have it. Or, well, I'm not supposed to be doing that. I must supposed to be doing, as if there's somebody out there who has a better opinion about what you should be doing than you. It is, after all, our lives. And how easily we become confused, disappointed, or defeated, and we give up along the way, especially if these are our habitual patterns of response that have been internally supported and reinforced by our thinking, feeling loop. Guilt, unworthiness, you name it, all that junk and nonsense. So we have to learn how to stick it out. We have to learn to keep trusting that we really do interact with this law of mind. And that we have this mind, that we use this mind, and we have this opportunity to break the habit of being the self we've been, so that we can become the self that we know we are. Jason has grown up to be a young man of character, taking care of himself, living a life. He's living his bliss. He's 23 years old, and he is living his bliss because he was never labeled. He never believed in anything, basically because I didn't tell him. And I refuse to believe it. Do you see? The only thing that's true about us is that we are radiant, magnificent beings of love and light. That is the only thing that's true about us, with a capital T, true. Everything else is habit. So let's create, so Max Planck says this. He says, there is no matter as such. The mind is the matrix of all matter. Erwin Schrödinger, who established the basis of the wave mechanics behind quantum mechanics, theorized that individual consciousness is only a manifestation of unitary consciousness pervading the universe. Do you see? Beings of love and light, individual manifestations of unitary consciousness. Oh, and this is a scientist speaking. Wolfgang Pauli, another of quantum mechanics' most significant pioneers, turned to Carl Jung for clues of the mysteries with which he was dealing, writing essays about, quote, the mystic experience of oneness. And Heisenberg, he talked about one of the most amazing discoveries of quantum mechanics. Everything is potential. Nothing is impossible. Improbable, maybe, but nothing is impossible. Heisenberg went on to say the concept that there are laws of nature which, in their absolute omnipotence, will not allow certain events to occur, this is no longer an acceptable position. We used to call them miracles. Do you see? The potential for anything is available to us. There is nothing that is impossible. It is up to us to decide whether it's probable. So this is what we're working on in the Wednesday night series. I'm sorry we weren't able to get started last week because of the snow, but we are diving deeper into our book, The Breaking the Habits of Being Yourself, and we are going to work with ancient technologies and spiritual practices that are designed specifically to break this thinking, feeling, thinking feedback loop so that that self that we want to be, is actually that which is creating the experience that we choose to have. So join me on Wednesday night. Let us pray. How good it is to know that there is this infinite matrix. There is really no such thing as matter, just mind slowed down into a form that we can see. And you and I, individualized expressions of that unifying consciousness, that one infinite reality. And it is pouring itself through us that it may experience itself, that it may study life and study the out-picturing of its own desires, your desires, my desires, the deepest desires of our hearts, to express our lives, to give fully, to love completely, to share our gifts, to make a difference in the world. And as we come together today, let us affirm and declare that there is nothing within our consciousness, nothing within our subjective mind, no old pattern or old system within our bodies that stands in the way of the eternal truth of who we are. That we begin to break the chains of those habits, and we allow the light of truth, the light of love, the light of our being to shine forth in all of its greatness. And then we too follow our bliss. We live the lives that we are meant to live, wholly, completely, fully engaged in the creative process. And when we do so, our lives are blessed, and we become a blessing wherever we go. Not only are our lives lifted, but all life is lifted. For this, we are so grateful to know these truths and to be able to use them in our lives. We are grateful. We're grateful for the opportunity to turn to the truth and to know it is so. And so we let it be. And so it is.